So in this video, as you can possibly guess from the title and thumbnail, I'm going to be doing a series review for The Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb, which is a pretty popular epic adult high fantasy series. There are 16 books in total in the series that are split into 5 separate sub-series. So it's a pretty big commitment, and I am honestly so proud of myself for actually finishing this series. There was a point where I was convinced it wasn't going to happen, and I think that's why I wanted to make this video and talk about my experience with this series. But also, if you are thinking about getting into Robin Hobb's writing, if you're not sure where to start, then hopefully this video will be helpful. I'm going to split this video into sections. I'm going to start with some general comments, I'm going to talk about the writing and the atmosphere and the world, and then I'm going to move on to talk about the reading order, and that's where I'll go into a bit of a plot summary and also the general themes that the series explores. I'm going to keep it all spoiler free, so if you are interested in the series and you don't want spoilers, then do not worry, I'm not going to be talking about anything in specific detail. So I'm going to start by talking about Robin Hobb's writing, because I feel like Robin Hobb has quite a distinct writing style, and if you've read this series then you're probably going to guess exactly what I'm going to say, but this series is incredibly character driven, and what that means in reality is that Robin Hobb will spend pages and chapters talking about the characters' thoughts and feelings and showing you how they interact with other characters, and it's great because it means that the characters have so much depth, and by the end of the series you feel like you've been on a journey with these characters. You feel like you know everything about them, and I think that's really special. But also, if you're the kind of person who's ever read a book and thought, when are we getting to the plot? I'm kind of bored. If you've ever felt that while reading a book, then this series might not be for you, because the plot doesn't really matter. What's more important is how the characters react to what's happening. Because it's so character driven, it's also very slow, and it's the kind of series that you need to have a lot of patience for. I read this series over 2.5 years. I read Assassin's Apprentice back in August 2021, so yeah, almost 3 years it took me to read this series, and I didn't actually have any kind of problem with reading it over a long period of time. Again, because it's so character driven, what I found is whenever I picked up the next book in a series, it didn't take me that long to feel like I was back in the world with the characters, because the focus is on the characters, and because there isn't really that much plot, I didn't have any kind of problem with remembering what had happened in previous books. Another of the main reasons why it took me so long to finish this series is because I found it very emotionally draining. The tone is very melancholy, and while there are more hopeful moments throughout the series, Robin Hobb is not afraid to torture her characters, and it's a testament to her writing that you do feel so attached to them and you feel everything that they're feeling. But it was a lot at times, and I cried too many times while reading this series. So if all of the above sounds good to you, if it sounds like something that you would enjoy, then the next thing to consider is which series to start with, because there are 2 main entryways into the Realm of the Elderlings. Each series has its own contained story arc, but they all build on each other, and the payoff in some of the later series is so satisfying that I think you would be missing out on quite a lot if you haven't read the earlier books. So the 2 places where a lot of people recommend you can start is either Assassin's Apprentice, which is the first book in the Farseer Trilogy, or Ship of Magic, which is the first book in the Liv Ship Traders. The Farseer Trilogy is made up of 3 books: Assassin's Apprentice, Royal Assassin, and Assassin's Quest. The various series do take place in different areas of the world, but generally speaking they all have a medieval type setting and a classic fantasy feeling. I love it when a world has a deep and rich history, but not everything is known about the world because some knowledge has been lost, and I think The Realm of the Elderlings does that very well. The first book that I read was Assassin's Apprentice, which is the book that was published first, and it's the book that really introduces you to the world of the Six Duchies, which is where The Realm of the Elderlings takes place. What I find really interesting about this world is how noble families will name their children after different characteristics characteristics, and quite often those children will grow up to embody those characteristics. For example, you have King Shrewd, Prince Chivalry, Prince Verity, and the Lady Patience. It's in this first trilogy where we meet Fitz, who is the main character for most of the Realm of the Elderlings. There are some books that follow different characters, but Fitz is the main character for 9 of the books. You first meet him when he's around 6 years old, and he is the bastard son of Prince Chivalry, who's the king in waiting. So initially, when the royal family find out about Fitz, he's kind of pushed to one side. He's raised by the stable master and kind of ignored until he reaches like his late childhood, early teenage years, and that's when he is trained to become a royal assassin. I feel like assassin might be a bit misleading though. When you hear the word assassin, it makes you think of a certain type of person or a certain type of character, and I feel like the better way to describe Fitz is he's trained to become a spy. So because he's part of the royal family but not directly in line for the throne, it's not unusual for him to attend royal meetings, and it's not unusual for him to be sent as like an envoy. Is that the right word? He's taught how to observe other people's behaviour and report back to the spy master of the royal family. Essentially, this first trilogy is a coming of age story, so you follow Fitz throughout his entire childhood until his late teens, early 20s, and you see how it affects him being part of the royal family, but also not really. His life is never his own, and that is a really big theme throughout this trilogy, but also in the later books when you follow Fitz as an adult, you see how his childhood goes on to affect his later life. The plot for this series is that there is a war happening in the background. Again, I say there's a war and I feel like that conjures up a certain image or a certain expectation of the type of story this is. The war is being played out in the background because Fitz is a child and then a teenager. He's not so much actively involved in this war, but he's hearing about it and he's seeing how the adults in his life are trying to manage this war, especially the royal family. It's quite political, and that was the one thing that I did really appreciate about this first trilogy. You're also introduced to 2 types of magic. You have the wit, which is essentially the ability to communicate with animals, and this does have the animal companion trope, which is something that I really love and that I thought was done really well in this series. The wit is also seen as like a lowborn type of magic, whereas on the other hand, the skill is a type of magic that is usually present in royalty and nobility, and that is essentially the ability to communicate through minds, but there's a lot more to it than that. The magic systems do get built on throughout the rest of the series, but essentially you have these 2 magic systems, one of which is very much feared and the other that is held in very high regard. Following the Farseer Trilogy, you then have the Liv Ship Traders Trilogy. The Liv Ship Traders is made up of Ship of Magic, the Mad Ship, and Ship of Destiny. It takes place after the events of the Farseer Trilogy, but in a different part of the world. So this is different to the Farseer Trilogy because it's multi-POV and it's also told in third-person perspective. So the Farseer Trilogy is told in first-person POV, as if Fitz is writing about his childhood later in life, almost like a series of diaries or letters. The Liv Ship Traders, on the other hand, is third-person POV, and there are multiple characters that you follow. Most of them, or many of them, are part of this one family who owns a live ship. Live ships are exactly what they sound like. They're ships that come alive, and they are quite lucrative in this part of the world because there's also this area called the Rain Wilds, and in order to trade with the Rain Wilds you need a live ship because live ships are the only ships that can travel up the Rain Wild River. It took me a little while to say all of that, but essentially within this series we're following many characters. Like I said, most of them are part of this family who owns a live ship, Liveship, and there's a lot of internal politics within this family. There's also a lot of small town politics. There's one member of this particular family who has always assumed that she will inherit the family's Liveship once her father passes away. However, when she learns that that's not going to happen and it's going to go to someone else, that's when the drama really begins. There's also the perspective of a pirate, someone who is looking to become king of the pirates. You also have the perspective of the sea serpents. It's really clever how it all comes together, because in the beginning some of the perspectives feel a little bit random. You do also get the perspectives of the Liveships, or the Liveships are characters in themselves. I loved the characters in this. I think this has some of the best character development throughout the Realm of the Outlings. There are characters that when you first meet them, you don't like them, and then you grow to love them because you see how they change and develop. There's also characters that I liked in the beginning. By the end of the series, I either didn't like them or I'd completely changed my mind on them. What I will say is that this series has a pretty big content warning for sexual assault, including stuff that happens on page. And in some situations, I thought that Robin Hobb did a really good job of showing how the characters were processing their trauma, but there were also situations where I thought it could have been handled a little better. Following the Liv Ship Traders trilogy, you have the Tawny Man Trilogy, which returns to Fitz's perspective. It's made up of Fool's Errand, Golden Fool, and Fool's Fate. I know that some people feel tempted to skip the Liv Ship Traders trilogy and go straight into the Tawny Man Trilogy because they don't want to wait to continue Fitz's story. However, I would recommend not doing that, because if you go into the Tawny Man Trilogy having not read the Liv Ship Traders, you're going to be a little bit confused at first, because the Liv Ship Traders does have some really important world building. Golden Fool is actually the second book in this trilogy. The first book is Fool's Errand. I don't own Fool's Errand. It's the only book in the series that I don't actually own, annoyingly. But in this series, we return to Fitz's story, and he is now that little bit older, and there's not much I can really say in terms of the plot, other than it continues on from the end of Assassin's Quest. What this series does focus on, though, is the wit and the way the witted people are ostracised by society. There's a big theme around challenging prejudices, which I thought was really interesting. The ending to the series was going to be the original ending, so if you get to the end and you don't want to continue for whatever reason, then you can stop there. However, I really liked the last two series within the Realm of the Outlings. Some people have mixed opinions on the Rain Chronicles, which is the fourth series. The Rain Chronicles is the only series to contain 4 books: The Dragon Keeper, Dragon Haven, City of Dragons, and Blood of Dragons. I quite liked this, first of all because there are dragons and you do get the perspective of some of the dragons, which is really fun. This series is essentially about a group of people who are accompanying a group of dragons, and it really focuses on the issues that arise within this small group. This series does sometimes get labelled as YA, which I would disagree with. It does have a lot of younger characters, and it explores issues that affect these teenagers, their relationships that develop, and you see characters processing their feelings, having been told their entire lives that they're not allowed to have those feelings. This takes place in the Rain Wilds, and a lot of the people who are born in the Rain Wilds are often born with disfigurements, and so they're told their whole lives that they're not allowed to marry and pass on those genes. This also has a character who is moving forward after being in an abusive relationship. It does have some pacing issues. I think Robin Hobb's intention was that this would be a duology, but the publisher requested that it be turned into a quartet. So the way that I would view this series is the first 2 books are essentially one book, part 1 and part 2. Then books 3 and 4 also form one volume told in 2 parts. That's the way that I would kind of approach this series, because yeah, the pacing was the main issue that I had with it, but all of the themes I did really appreciate. I am getting snowed in here by all of these books. You also get a lot of world building in the Rain Chronicles, which is important important for the final trilogy. So let's talk about the final trilogy. I feel like I've been filming this video all afternoon. The Fitz and the Fool trilogy is the conclusion of Fitz's story. It starts with Fool's Assassin, book 2 is Fool's Quest, and the final book is Assassin's Fate. This is the series that brings everything together, and it is so satisfying. By this point, because this series does follow Fitz again in older age, by this point I felt so attached to Fitz that I was quite happy reading about him doing anything. This first book in particular feels a little bit mundane. However, the intensity with which Robin Hobb writes, I was literally on the edge of my seat throughout the entire second and third book. It has themes around prophecy and fate, and it was epic. I was so stressed. The ending, in my opinion, was perfect, and I sobbed. I cried more than I have cried in a very long time at a book. So for me, it was worth getting through all of the previous books. I say getting through all of the previous books. I enjoyed many of the other books in this series, but this final trilogy in particular was where it really paid off. So I went on a bit of a journey with this series. I enjoyed Assassin's Apprentice, which was the first book that I read. Then Royal Assassin I thought was okay right up until the end, and I thought the ending of Royal Assassin was fantastic, and I was really excited to go into Assassin's Quest. I hated Assassin's Quest. I gave it 2 stars. I thought the ending was really interesting, but there was this bit in the middle where it felt really slow and I was bored. I think by that point I just wasn't feeling attached to Fitz, which is really interesting because having now finished the entire series, I think if I was to go back now and reread Assassin's Quest, I would appreciate it a lot more because I would be viewing it as a prequel almost. All of that to say, I think if you start with the Farseer Trilogy and you find that it's not really working for you, depending on the reasons why, I would still recommend picking up Ship of Magic. I think if it's the writing that you don't like, then that's not going to really change. Robin Hobb does have quite a formal writing style, which remains consistent throughout the entire series. If it's the characters that you don't like, or if it's the pacing, or if it's the lack of plot, then I think you should still give Ship of Magic a go, because I think the Liveship Traders has the most plot out of the entire series. If you do read Ship of Magic and you finish the Liveship Traders, I would then recommend going back and finishing the Farseer Trilogy, because I don't think you can read past the Liveship Traders unless you've read the first 6 books. I think you could read the Liveship Traders as a standalone series. It does wrap up like a standalone series, but because later books are so entwined with Fitz's story, I feel like you need the context of Assassin's Quest to fully appreciate the later books. If you're thinking about listening to the audiobooks for this series, I would recommend seeing if you can listen to a sample first, because the audiobook narrators across all of the series are quite divisive. I went back and forth between listening to the audiobooks and reading physically, and I liked the narrator for the first trilogy. Didn't mind the narrator for the second trilogy. I thought she did an okay job, but nothing that I would like go out of my way to recommend. And then I liked the narrator for the Tawny Man Trilogy. For the Rain Chronicles, what really annoyed me is I liked the narrator for the first book, but then they changed to a different narrator, and then they went back to the original narrator, and then they changed narrators again. There were 3 different narrators for the 4 books, and it would have been fine if they'd been consistent with how they were pronouncing certain names and places, but they weren't. One of the narrators kept pronouncing live ships as live ships, and it really annoyed me. The final trilogy I didn't actually listen to on audiobook. I read it all physically. However, my partner listened to the audiobooks, and again, they did the same thing again. They changed the narrator apparently after the second book, which I don't really understand, but yeah. The audiobooks I think are a bit hit or miss for people. I thought they were just okay, and they helped me get through some of the slower books, but I wouldn't go out of my way to recommend this series on audio. If it was ever announced that they were redoing the audiobooks for this series, then that would make make me feel really excited, because I would definitely listen to those. But I feel like I'm rambling now, so I'm going to wrap up this video here. Hopefully you found this somewhat helpful. I don't know how coherent I've been when talking about these books, but hopefully my enthusiasm has come across. I did really like parts of this series. The world building in particular I loved, and I also found the magic systems really fascinating. But yeah, thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments if you've read this series and what you thought of it. Let me know any of your thoughts and feelings, and don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and click subscribe if you would like to see more videos from me. But otherwise, I will see you next time. Bye.